The Urnfield culture was a late Bronze Age culture of Central Europe. The name comes from the custom of cremating the dead and placing their ashes in urns which were then buried in fields. The Urnfield culture followed the tumulus culture and was succeeded by the Hallstatt culture. Linguistic evidence and continuity with the following Hallstatt culture suggests that the people of this area spoke an early form of Celtic, perhaps originally Proto-Celtic. Chronology. It is believed that in some areas, such as in southwestern Germany, it was in existence around 1200 BC, but the Bronze Diereise phase already contains cremations. As the transition from the Middle Bronze Age to the Urnfield culture was gradual, there are questions regarding how to define it. The Urnfield culture covers the phases Hallstatt A and B in Paul Reinecker's chronological system, not to be confused with the Hallstatt culture of the following Iron Age. This corresponds to the phases Montelius III of the Northern Bronze Age. Whether Reinecker's Bronze D is included varies according to author and region. The Urnfield culture is divided into the following sub-phases. The existence of the HB3 phase is contested, as the material consists of female burials only, as can be seen by the arbitrary 100-year ranges. The dating of the phases is highly schematic. The phases are based on typological changes, which means that they do not have to be strictly contemporaneous across the whole distribution. All in all, more radiocarbon and dendro dates would be highly desirable. Origin. The Urnfield culture grew from the preceding tumulus culture. The transition is gradual, in the pottery as well as the burial rites. In some parts of Germany, cremation and inhumation existed simultaneously. Some graves contain a combination of tumulus culture pottery and Urnfield swords or tumulus culture incised pottery together with early Urnfield types. In the north, the Urnfield culture was only adopted in the Ha2 period. 16 pins deposited in Swamp in El Musen cover the whole chronological range from Bronze B to the early Urnfield period. This demonstrates of considerable ritual continuity. In the Loire, Seine and Rhône, certain fords contain deposits from the late Neolithic onwards up to the Urnfield period. The origins of the cremation rite are commonly believed to be in Hungary, where it was widespread since the first half of the second millennium BC. The Neolithic Cuirasses culture of modern-day northeastern Romania and Ukraine were also practicing cremation rituals as early as approximately 5500 BC. Some cremations begin to be found in the Proto-Lusatian and Traschinese culture. Distribution and local groups. The Urnfield culture was located in an area stretching from western Hungary to eastern France, from the Alps to near the North Sea. Local groups, mainly differentiated by pottery, include Novice culture in western and northern Bohemia, southern Thuringia and northeastern Bavaria, Milevsa culture in southeastern Bohemia, Unstruck culture in Thuringia, a mixture between Novice culture and the South German Urnfield culture, Lusatian culture in northern Bohemia, Lusatia and Poland. South German Urnfield culture Northeast Bavarian group, divided into a Lower Bavarian and an Upper Palatinate group. Lower Main Swabian group in southern Hesse and Baden-Württemberg, including the Marburger, Hanauer, Lower Main and Friedberger facies. Rhenish Swiss group in Rhineland-Palatinate, Switzerland and eastern France. Lower Rhine Urnfield culture Lower Hessian group. North Netherlands Westphalian group. Northwest group in the Dutch Delta region. Middle Danube Urnfield culture of Elatisbiedorf in Moravia and Austria. Kaka in western Slovakia. Gava culture. Sometimes the distribution of artifacts belonging to these groups shows sharp and consistent borders, which might indicate some political structures, like tribes. Metalwork is commonly of a much more widespread distribution than pottery and does not conform to these borders. It may have been produced at specialized workshops catering for the elite of a large area. Important French cemeteries include Châtenay and Lingolsheim. An unusual earthwork was constructed at Gollering near Koblenz in Germany. Related cultures. The Central European Lusatian culture forms part of the Urnfield tradition, but continues into the Iron Age without a notable break. The Pilani culture in northern Hungary and Slovakia grew from the tumulus culture, but used urn burials as well. The pottery shows strong links to the Gava culture, but in the later phases, a strong influence of the Lusatian culture is found. In Italy, the Late Bronze Age Cannagrate and Proto-Villanovan cultures and the early Iron Age Villanovan culture show similarities with the Urnfields of Central Europe. Urnfields are found in the French Languedoc and Catalonia from the 9th to 8th centuries. The change in burial custom was most probably influenced by developments further east. The Gola-Secca culture in northern Italy developed with continuity from the Cannagrate culture. Cannagrate represented a completely new cultural dynamic to the area expressed in pottery and bronze work, making it a typical Western example of the Urnfield culture, in particular the Rhine Switzerland Eastern France Urnfield culture. The Lepontic Celtic language inscriptions of the area show the language of the Gola-Secca culture was clearly Celtic, making it probable that the 13th century B.C. language of at least the RSEF area of the Western Urnfields was also Celtic or a precursor to it. Place name evidence has also been used to point to an association of the Urnfield materials with a Proto-Celtic language group in Central Europe, and it has been argued that it was the ancestral culture of the Celts. The Urnfield layers of the Hallstatt culture, HA and HB, are succeeded by the Iron Age, Hallstatt period, proper, associated with the early Celts. HD is in turn succeeded by the Latine culture. The archaeological culture associated with the continental Celts of Antiquity. The influence of the Urnfield culture spread widely and found its way to the northeastern Iberian coast, where the nearby Celtiberians of the interior adapted it for use in their cemeteries. Evidence for east to west early Urnfield elite contacts such as rilled ware, swords and crested helmets has been found in the southwest of the Iberian Peninsula. The appearance of such elite status markers provides the simplest explanation for the spread of Celtic languages in this area from prestigious Proto-Celtic, early Urnfield metalworkers. Migrations. The numerous hordes of the Urnfield culture and the existence of fortified settlements were taken as evidence for widespread warfare and upheaval by some scholars. Written sources describe several collapses and upheavals in the eastern Mediterranean, Anatolia and the Levant around the time of the Urnfield origins. End of the Mycenaean culture with a conventional date of California, 1200 BC. Destruction of Troy by California, 1200 BC. Battles of Ramses III against the Sea Peoples, 1195 to 1190 BC. End of the Hittite Empire, 1180 BC. Settlement of the Philistines in Palestine, California, 1170 BC. Some scholars, among them Wolfgang Kimmig and P. Bosch Gimperer, have postulated a Europe-wide wave of migrations. The so-called Dorian invasion of Greece was placed in this context as well. Better methods of dating have shown that these events are not as closely connected as once thought. More recently, Robert Drews, after having reviewed and dismissed the migration hypothesis, has suggested that the observed cultural associations may be in fact partly explained as the result of a new kind of warfare based upon the slashing NAUE2 sword, and with bands of infantry replacing chariots in warfare. Drews suggests that the political instability that this brought to centralized states based upon Marianne chariotry caused the breakdown of these polities. Settlements. The number of settlements increased sharply in comparison with the preceding tumulus culture. Unfortunately, few have been comprehensively excavated. Fortified settlements, often on hilltops or in river bends, are typical for the Urnfield culture. They are heavily fortified with dry stone or wooden ramparts. Pit dwellings are known as well. They might have served as cellars. Open settlements, the houses were 1 or 2-aisled. Some were quite small, 4.5 meters times 5 meters at the Runderberg, 5 to 8 meters long in Kunzerg, others up to 20 meters long. They were built with wooden posts and walls of wattle and daub. At the Velatis settlement of Lovsitsky, 44 houses have been excavated. Large bell-shaped storage pits are known from the Novice culture. The settlement of Radenice contained over 100 pits. They were most probably used to store grain and demonstrate a considerable surplus production. Pile dwellings on lakes of southern Germany and Switzerland. Numerous pile dwellings were constructed. They consist either of simple, one-room houses made of wattle and daub, or log-built. The settlement at Zug, Switzerland, was destroyed by fire and gives important insights into the material culture and the settlement organization of this period. It has yielded a number of dendrodates as well. Fortified settlements. Fortified hilltop settlements become common in the Urnfield period. Often a steep spur was used, where only part of the circumference had to be fortified. Depending on the locally available materials, dry stone walls, gridded timbers filled with stones or soil, or plank and palisade-type Pfostenschlitzmauer fortifications were used. Other fortified settlements used rivers, bends and swampy areas. At the hill fort of Horowitz near Beraun, 50 hectares were surrounded by a stone wall. Most settlements are much smaller. Metalworking is concentrated in the fortified settlements. On the Runderberg near Urach, Germany, 25 stone molds have been found. Hill forts are interpreted as central places. Some scholars see the emergence of hill forts as a sign of increased warfare. Most hill forts were abandoned at the end of the Bronze Age. As far as we know, there are no special dwellings for an upper class, but few settlements have been excavated to any extent. In the Franche-Comté, caves were used as dwellings, perhaps in times of trouble. Material culture. Pottery. The pottery is normally well made, with a smooth surface and a normally sharply carinated profile. Some forms are thought to imitate metal prototypes. Biconical pots with cylindrical necks are especially characteristic. There is some incised decoration, but a large part of the surface was normally left plain. Fluted decoration is common. In the Swiss pile dwellings, the incised decoration was sometimes inlaid with tinfoil. Pottery kilns were already known, as is indicated by the homogeneous surface of the vessels as well. Other vessels include cups of beaten sheet bronze with riveted handles and large cauldrons with cross attachments. Wooden vessels have only been preserved in waterlogged contexts, for example from Auvergne, but may have been quite widespread. Tools and weapons. The early Urnfield period was a time when the warriors of Central Europe could be heavily armored with body armor, helmets and shields all made of bronze. Probably borrowing the idea from Mycenaean Greece, the leaf-shaped Urnfield sword could be used for slashing. In contrast to the stabbing swords of the preceding tumulus culture, it commonly possessed a ricochet. The hilt was normally made from bronze as well. It was cast separately and consisted of a different alloy. These solid hilted swords were known since Bronze D. Other swords have tanged blades and probably had a wood, bone, or antler hilt. Flange-hilted swords had organic inlays in the hilt. Swords include Auvergne, Crespon, Hemikofen, Erbenheim, Moringen, Weltenberg, Hemikofen and Taklovice types. Protective gear like shields, cuirasses, greaves and helmets are extremely rare and almost never found in burials. The best-known example of a bronze shield comes from Pleasant in Bohemia and has a riveted handhold. Comparable pieces have been found in Germany, western Poland, Denmark, Great Britain and Ireland. They are supposed to have been made in Upper Italy or the Eastern Alps and imitate wooden shields. Irish bogs have yielded examples of leather shields. Bronze cuirasses are known since Bronze D. Complete bronze cuirasses have been found in Saint-Germain-du-Plain, 9 examples, one inside the other, in Marmessa, Othman. Fragments in Albstadt-Pfeffingen. Bronze dishes may have been sewn on a leather armor. Greaves of richly decorated sheet bronze are known from Klostar of Anik and the Paulus Cave near Biron. Chariots. About a dozen wagon burials of four-wheeled wagons with bronze fittings are known from the early Urnfield period. They include Harten der Alts, Mengen, Poing, Königsbronn from Germany and St. Sulpice, Switzerland. In Als, the chariot had been placed on the pyre. Pieces of bone are attached to the partially melted metal of the axles. Bronze bits appear at the same time. Two-part horse bits are only known from late Urnfield contexts and may be due to Eastern influence. Wooden bronze spoked wheels are known from Stade, a wooden spoked wheel from Mercurigo, Italy. Wooden dish wheels have been excavated at Korslitz, Switzerland and the Wasserburg Buchor, Germany. In Milovce near Domaslice, Bohemia, a four-wheeled miniature bronze wagon bearing a large cauldron contained a cremation. This exceptionally rich burial was covered by a barrow. The wagon from Mackelshauslen comes from a male burial. Such wagons are known from the Nordic Bronze Age as well. The Skallerup wagon, Denmark, contained a cremation as well. At Picatel in Mecklenburg, a cauldron wagon and other rich grave goods accompanied an inhumation under a barrow. Another example comes from Ystad in Sweden. Southeastern European examples include Kanya in Hungary and Orasti in Romania. Clay miniature wagons, sometimes with waterfowl, were known there since the Middle Bronze Age. The Lusatian chariot from Berg has 3 wheels on a single axle, on which waterfowl perch. The grave of Gammertingen contained 2 socketed horned applications that probably belonged to a miniature wagon comparable to the Berg example, together with 6 miniature spoked wheels. Hordes are very common in the Urnfield culture. The custom is abandoned at the end of the Bronze Age. They were often deposited in rivers and wet places like swamps. As these spots were often quite inaccessible, they most probably represent gifts to the gods. Other hordes contain either broken or miscast objects that were probably intended for reuse by bronze smiths. As late Urnfield hordes often contain the same range of objects as earlier graves. Some scholars interpret hoarding as a way to supply personal equipment for the hereafter. In the river Trieu, Côte du Nord, complete swords were found together with numerous antlers of red deer that may have had a religious significance as well. Iron. An iron ring from Vorwolder dating to the 15th century BC is the earliest evidence of iron in Central Europe. During the Late Bronze Age, iron was used to decorate the hilts of swords and knives and pins. The use of iron for weapons and domestic items in Europe only started in the following Hallstatt culture. The widespread use of iron for tools only occurred in the late Iron Age Latin culture. Economy. Cattle, pigs, sheep and goats were kept, as well as horses and dogs, and maybe geese. The cattle were rather small, with a height of 1.20 meters at the withers. Horses were not much bigger, with a mean of 1.25 meters. Forest clearance was intensive in the Urnfield period. Probably open meadows were created for the first time, as shown by pollen analysis. This led to increased erosion and sediment load of the rivers. Wheat and barley were cultivated, together with pulses and the horse bean. Poppy seeds were used for oil or as a drug. Millet and oats were cultivated for the first time in Hungary and Bohemia. Rye was already cultivated. Further west it was only a noxious weed. Flax seems to have been of reduced importance, maybe because mainly wool was used for clothes. Hazelnuts, apples, pears, sloes and acorns were collected. Some rich graves contain bronze sieves that have been interpreted as wine sieves. This beverage would have been imported from the south, but supporting evidence is lacking. In the lacustrine settlement of Zug, remains of a broth made of spelt and millet have been found. In the lower Rhine Urnfields, leavened bread was often placed on the pyre and burnt fragments have thus been preserved. Wool was spun and woven on the warp-weighted loom. Bronze needles were used for sewing. There is some suggestion that the Urnfield culture is associated with a wetter climatic period than the earlier tumulus cultures. This may be associated with the diversion of the mid-latitude winter storms north of the Pyrenees in the Alps, possibly associated with drier conditions in the Mediterranean basin.